Hey all, Ron here from Military Images Magazine with a new episode of Life on the Civil War, a research trail. Today we're headed to Tuesday, December 21st, 1909. It was a normal weekday for John Wilder Boutwell, who managed the front office of a coal yard in Burlington, Vermont. Considering the winter weather and with Christmas just a few days away, it was likely a busy time for the 64-year-old New Hampshire native and veteran who served in the ranks of the Granite States 18th Infantry. He's pictured here about that time. Though Private Boutwell's service was brief, he served a 9-month stint from September 1864 to June of 1865. It was memorable. He spent much of the time in uniform in the Petersburg and Appomattox campaigns. Of particular interest was an event on April 2nd, 1865. About 4 o'clock in the morning, an advance party of skirmishers from the 18th, including Boutwell, fanned out and advanced from Fort Stedman, which they had helped capture just a week earlier, to feel out the Confederate position opposite them in preparation for a larger assault. The plan was simple. The major of the 18th New Hampshire recalled, "We were to move at a signal and go forward till we drew the rebel fire and retreat on a signal to be given." We got the signal and promptly moved out over the open field between the two lines till the enemy opened fire, when we were recalled by the signal. During that heavy fire and the withdrawal that fired, 2 men were wounded. One of the men, fellow Private Clarendon Cochrane, suffered a gunshot through both legs. He could not move. He was stranded in that place of the battlefield, that open field. Boutwell and another comrade, Private Carleton N. Camp, ran back and rescued Cochrane. Word of the deed made its way all the way up to the chain of command, right to the commander of the 9th Army Corps, Major General John G. Parke. He recommended both men for the Medal of Honor. Days passed without action, then weeks, then months. By the time the war ended, the government had still not acted on General Parke's request. 44 years later, on that December day in 1909, Boutwell and Camp received the medal. The citation states, "Brought off from the picket line under a heavy fire, a comrade who had been shot through both legs." 2 years later, in 1911, a story in the Burlington Daily News interviewed Boutwell. I want to read the reports of this modest warrior. The headline: "How a Burlington Veteran Won Medal of Honor in '65. Record of Commander of Standard Post, Grand Army of the Republic. Carried wounded comrade from fields swept by crossfire from Union and Confederate batteries." That's the headline. Story begins. John W. Boutwell, commander of Standard Post, Grand Army of the Republic, that's the local post for the GAR in Burlington, under auspices the Memorial Day exercises are held today, is the possessor of a Medal of Honor for conspicuous bravery in the Civil War. Mr. Boutwell is one of about a dozen heroes of Standard Post, dead or now living, who have been honored by the government with a congressional medal, and there have been but 1,500 such issued throughout the entire federal army that fought the battles of the Civil War. Among the veterans so honored were Burlingtonians who belonged to Standard Post at one time or another were the following: G.G. Benedict, T.S. Peck, O.O. Howard, that's Oliver Otis Howard for you students of the Civil War, George E. Davis, William Wells, John Lonergan, Edward A. Holton, W.W. Henry, Fred A. Lyon, Amasa S. Tracy, and J.W. Boutwell. Mr. Boutwell is serving his second term as post commander previous to which, for a term or two, he was at the head of Sherman Post in Essex Junction. That's a nearby GAR post. When asked by a Daily Newsman for the story of the act that secured the much prized medal, Mr. Boutwell very modestly disclaimed having done anything out of the ordinary, or what any soldier might have done, and many did do, at the call of duty. "But you had better see George P. Martin," replied Mr. Boutwell, "if you want anything more than the bare fact that I have the medal, though I had much rather you said nothing about it. Mr. Martin was color sergeant in my regiment and was there at the time." So the reporter found Mr. Martin. Mr. Martin was seen, and he consented to tell something of how his comrade, Boutwell, won the medal. "We were before Petersburg," began Mr. Martin, "about noon on April 2nd, 1865. Boutwell had been sent with a lot of others of our company, including myself, to go forward on the skirmish line for picket duty. The Federal forces were concentrating upon Fort Stedman, and each side was engaged in skirmishing. The distance between the two forts was short, and the danger of exposure to fire from the enemy's guns was great. I was about a short distance from Comrade Boutwell when suddenly, following a particularly heavy fire which mowed down the men like grass, Private Boutwell turned to one side and ran to the side of a fallen soldier, whom he picked up and, placing him across his shoulder, carried him to safety. The man whom he risked his life for was Private Cochrane of the same regiment, who had been shot in both legs. Mr. Boutwell was exposed to the fire and crossfire of both the enemy and of the Federal troops all the time that he was rescuing his comrade, but he escaped with him. Cochrane recovered and lived to a good old age, passing away last year. He was deeply grateful to Mr. Boutwell for saving his life and kept in touch with him afterward. Fortunately, and because of the prompt action of Mr. Boutwell in giving him his injured comrade, pulled through with both legs, although both were shot through below the knee. The regiment lost 27 men that day in the fight between the forces, one of the fiercest engagements of the siege of Petersburg, which, when taken practically, brought the 4-year struggle to an end. Major General Joseph M. Claw of New London, New Hampshire, who was in command of the New Hampshire troops in the engagement of April 2nd, was in Burlington at the time of the Champlain Tertiary and visited Mr. Boutwell and Mr. Martin, recalling the incident above related. Mr. Boutwell was about 19 years of age when he enlisted in the service from Hanover, New Hampshire. It was 44 years after the war that he secured the medal, and it was by the active cooperation of his friends that Congress awarded it. The inscription on the reverse side of the medal reads as follows: "Presented to John W. Boutwell, Company B, 18th New Hampshire, Infantry Volunteers, Petersburg, April 2nd, 1865. He comes of fighting stock, his father and grandfather both being soldiers." Mr. Boutwell is now in charge of the yard office of Gay and Henderson, coal dealers. He is beloved by his comrades in arms and faithful to his trust in civil life as he was in the brunt of battle. Boutwell lived until 1920 and left behind the Medal of Honor and the story of his courage and the account of a modest man who, like so many men who did amazing things in a moment of fear and a moment of battle, and didn't really want to talk about it, but his friends did, and so can share it with you in this video. Thanks for listening. We'll see you on the next episode of Life on the Civil War Research Trail.